The UFC has managed to change the world of MMA forever. It's become an unstoppable force in the sport. Though something a lot of you may not know is how it all began. Initially, before the UFC was even a thought, there was the infamous Gracie Challenge. Here, the Gracie family developed an ingenious way to market their martial art. They issued a worldwide challenge for fighters to come and face off against their BJJ fighters. All manner of fighters came through and none managed to come off with the win. This helped to grow the martial arts fame and it helped it to rise to new heights. However, this wasn't enough for the Gracie family. They wanted to expand their martial art out of Brazil and help it reach every part of the world. And so, Rory and Gracie came up with the brilliant idea of expanding into the United States. This led them to partnering up with John Milius and Art Davie. And so, the Ultimate Fighting Championship was formed. The idea to start the fighting promotion was no doubt an excellent one. With where it's gotten today, there's no doubt in my mind that MMA wouldn't be where it is today had it not been for the UFC, though not everything went perfectly. Of course, I'm talking about the numerous controversies the UFC faced early on. The UFC was a spectacle that attracted many. However, with this newfound fame came a lot more problems. See, unlike what it is today, in those days, the UFC was a no-holds-barred, bare-knuckle brawl. People loved it, well, most of the time. There were, of course, those who thought that this was nothing more than human cockfighting. A great example of this was Senator John McCain. He was shown a video of a fight from the early days and was appalled. He then started a campaign to have the UFC banned entirely. It ended up working out for him, as he managed to garner 36 votes in favor of banning the no-holds-barred fighting style the UFC had gotten famous for. This posed a serious problem for the UFC. The biggest came in the form of the fact that New York was one of the 36 states that banned the corporation. The problem was that UFC 12 was supposed to be held in New York. This caused the company to relocate its event. Plus, it also ended up causing the company to go through a ton of financial problems. The question is, what did the UFC do to combat these issues? Well, change the rules, of course. The UFC quickly realized that they needed to do something quickly before the company went down under. This led to the UFC cooperating with the State Athletic Commission across the board and introducing changes to their rules. They started by introducing weight classes. This was so that those good old David versus Goliath bouts could be put to rest. That way, that would be one less thing for the UFC to worry about. They also went ahead and made it mandatory for every fighter to wear gloves. This made bare-knuckle fights in the octagon a thing of the past. This also prevented fighters from sustaining too many injuries, as most of them got injured due to not having gloves on while they punched. Next up on the chopping block were the groin shots, shots to the back of the head, hair pulling, and headbutting. With all of these new rules being implanted, the UFC was able to appeal to a wider audience. This helped them to be able to generate more revenue for the company, as more and more people became interested to see what this new sport was. Though the company still wasn't done, they still had one major change to bring within the company. That was selling the company off to a new owner. See, the UFC were doing better than before, but they still weren't generating enough money. The UFC had turned out to be the worst investment SEG had made so far, and they were looking for any way that they could find to get rid of this deadweight of a corporation. They weren't even making enough money to be able to pay their fighters. This is where the Fertitta brothers and their business partner Dana White came into play. A month later, a deal was signed.
It was a different business, you know. I had the opportunity to really understand combat sports. I spent 4 years on the Nevada State Athletic Commission, learned a lot about the sport of boxing, about what they had done right, what they had done wrong, about a lot of the health and safety issues, about a lot of the business issues.
And the company was sold for $2 million. This turned out to be the best decision ever in favor of the UFC. Dana White turned out to be the messiah and savior of the company they'd all been waiting for.
When we sold, everybody was talking about how Ari overpaid for it and what a stupid move, blah, blah, blah. And then the thing's just gone like this since then, too. Yeah. So we always believed that this thing could be big if we did it the right way and it was done the right way. The question is always about the timing.
The Fertittas had bought the UFC and had created Zuffa LLC as a parent company for the fight promotion. Now that the UFC was in better hands, it was time to fix their financial troubles. So you're probably wondering what they come up with. And so, ladies and gentlemen, The Ultimate Fighter was born. Now, the Fertitta brothers had noticed that reality TV had saved their business before. They thought to themselves about how a gamble into television could potentially save the company and sport alike. And so, for the first time, the company shifted from its pay-per-view mindset and made a foray into television. This proved to be a pivotal turning point in the company's history. The Fertitta brothers, along with Dana White, had the idea of creating The Ultimate Fighter. This would be a reality TV show that would help capture both the personal aspect of being a mixed martial artist and the brutality of the sport.
me and my team are super tight, you know. And you know what? Think about this. The UFC has been this rocket ship of success since 2005, right? The first time the shit hits the fan and things get hard, and you know, probably the scariest thing we've ever been.
The winner of the reality TV show would win a 6-figure contract with the UFC. The only problem was that their broadcasting partner at the time, Spike TV, wouldn't continue with the show unless the Fertittas paid for the $10 million production cost up front. Once that was over and done with, it was now time to determine whether the big gamble would end up paying off or not.
And all the other things going, it's impossible. So do I sit in production meetings anymore? Not as much. Do I, you know, do all these things? But what you have to do, I believe, is to be a successful entrepreneur is there's usually 5 or 6 things that have made you successful.
Fortunately for all the parties involved, the show was a huge success and an overnight hit. People loved the fact that they would get an insight into both the personal lives of the fighters along with rough combat in each episode. With all that being said, it brings us to the last question we all want to be answered. How's the UFC doing these days? Well, these days, the organization has become the center point of MMA worldwide.
Nobody from here on out, throughout the history of this sport forever, will have contributed more to this sport than the Fertittas have. You know, it's easy to get into this sport now, right? We're breaking records at Madison Square Garden. The numbers are through the roof. Everything's crazy.
Under Dana White's leadership and the Fertitta brothers' money, the UFC was able to reach new heights and inspire millions. Now the UFC is considered to be the best the MMA community has to offer.
Conor, another brilliant performance. 13 wins, 12 knockouts, unbelievable. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Dana, 60 G's, baby!
Every single one of the best fighters in the sport is signed to the UFC. For many, it's considered to be the final destination, the promised land. It doesn't seem like it'll stop growing anytime soon. If I'm being honest, the fact that the UFC was able to save a whole sport from extinction is insane in itself. I'm glad that everything turned out the way it did. These days, the UFC is filled with drama, combat, and the best press conferences one could offer. Superstars such as Conor McGregor and Francis Ngannou have all been bred by the organization. The UFC is responsible for some of the biggest fights in the world. It's insane that the company managed to do a complete 180 and become the best the sport has to offer. I guess we'll just have to see how they continue to flourish as time goes on. For now, all we can do is sit back and watch as the UFC continues to churn out top-tier content. It never ceases to amaze me how many superstars the UFC has managed to create until now. That was everything about how the UFC came to be what it is today. We'll see you in the next video.